nuggets. Okay, I'm going to pause that for my recorded replay watchers. We're already in the sauce, okay? Welcome, everyone. Welcome, new members, attendees. Today, we're going to talk about the 5 biological laws as a means to understanding yourself and reality differently, in a way that's empowering, in a way that places what we were talking about previous to starting the recording, that places cause and effect in their correct places. And that means ending the pattern that we see, number one, in Western medicine, which is the victim-perpetrator-savior. That's the drama triangle, right? You have the victim, which is I'm sick, the perpetrator, the bacteria, the virus, the invisible thing out there always out to get me. In religion, we call it the devil. In psychology, we call it ego. And then we have the savior, right? In religion, we call it God, Jesus. In psychology, you can call it codependence, or you could just relate it to mom and dad, right? Big pharma. And so as long as that triangle is playing out, you have to experience a type of chronic dis-ease, because that is the definition of chronic dis-ease. There's no sustained relaxation in which healing can only occur. There is no sustained healing or relaxation within that paradigm. And functional medicine, holistic medicine, seems like an upgrade, and I'm going to call that level 2. Okay. Well, no, the power is in my hands. I can prevent things. I can control my environment. Terrain theory. It's all about my terrain. I can clean up my diet. I can learn how to manage stress. All of this, very helpful, very helpful. But as long as that triangle is continued, victim, perpetrator, savior, then the functional medicine world can just be another cloak, another way of disguising the same exact paradigm. Now I just need to muster myself up against the things that want to kill me. And now I feel slightly more empowered because I've read 10,000 studies about what could be causing my dis-ease. And now it's the chemtrails. Now it's the toxins in the food. Now it's just stress, which there's science that shows, yeah, stress isn't necessarily good for the body, but does it cause disease? And when I'm talking about stress, I'm not talking about an acute moment of shock that the body has to adapt to because of its survival instincts that has been patterned for millions of years. I'm not talking about that stress. I'm talking about the stress of day-to-day life. Does that actually cause disease? You'll find out in this presentation that it doesn't. You think the most advanced piece of technology on the planet, the body, can't adapt to stress after we've survived so much? So we're going to, look at the difference between stress and an acute shock that causes adaptation. Those are very different. So notice how Western medicine, it's just my body, this is the basis of materialism. It says my body's a machine, it can break down, it can make mistakes. I think everyone on this call has some degree of intuition that that's not true. Right? That the thing beating my heart, that literally trillions of processes going on right now in my body, is highly intelligent and doesn't make mistakes. So level 1, materialism, it's just a machine. And like machines we see in the material world, they break down and they mess up. Okay, that's paradigm 1. Just above that, paradigm 2 is functional medicine. Let's take some of our power back and let's work on prevention. Now the source is all these different things in my environment. This is the land of confusion, because there's a million things. You find studies that say this kind of food is really good, and then you find studies that say this food is bad. You find studies that say glyphosate is toxic. You find other studies that say, actually, glyphosate is only toxic in extreme loads. You can find a study proving every side of everything. And this is as long as you're in a position of, I need to prevent being attacked by virus, bacteria, or something out there, you're still in paradigm 1. It's just dressed up nicely. Now, paradigm 3 is German New Medicine. German New Medicine says, now I got to make this really clear because the ego will like to hijack this. The only cause of disease besides malnutrition, number 1, and malnutrition isn't, I would go as far as to say, anyone on this call, anyone really living in the West is not malnourished. Malnourished is like, it's like what we saw growing up on TV, starving kids in Africa, like that meme, that's malnutrition. It's extreme. People can water fast for 15, 20 days, and they'll get their blood tested, and they're not deficient in any vitamins or minerals. How do you explain that? So again, this is 1%. This is a tiny category, malnutrition. Second category that is outside of the German New Medicine sphere is poisoning. Yeah, if I chug a bunch of gasoline, I'm going to have a reaction. And psychosomatically, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I, am in total alignment and there's no programmed cell danger response associated to the gasoline that my unconscious is picking up. I can be completely clear, but poisoning is poisoning. And how you prove a poison is not psychosomatic is everyone, when they hit the toxic load of that chemical, has the same exact response. And it's repeatable and duplicatable. That's how you know it's actually coming from the poison. This is just using the scientific method. And then lastly is, okay, so it's poisoning, malnutrition, and what was the third? Physical trauma, like blunt trauma. You break a bone, or you have a traumatic brain injury from a car accident, a concussion. So these are the categories of, symptoms, a type of dis-ease, not really disease, and I'll define that in a moment, can emerge from these 3 areas. And now we're looking at the 1%. Okay, so what's the 99%? And I think I literally mean 99%. The 99% is what GNM has discovered. And that's what I'm going to share with you, which is, in short, and then I'm going to break down these laws. In short, every disease, the origin of every disease is in the psyche. And the psyche affects the brain, and the brain affects the corresponding organ. And this is actually one of the 5 laws. So this is a great transition. Is this all making sense so far? Yeah. Is there anything within you that's like, you just feel, I know when I heard this for the first time, my DNA was like, yeah, makes sense. It's like, I love what Dr. Melissa Sell says. She goes, it's biological. It's biological. Yeah, exactly. No, he that's different. It's unrelated, but they're pointing to the same thing. So let's start. I'm going to take out my notes for a moment here. We're going to go over the laws. And then from there, we're going to take questions. Okay, start with this one. So the short of the long, Dr. Hamer in Germany, this was over, I think, like maybe 40 years ago, 40 or 50 years ago, developed testicular cancer when his son tragically and suddenly died. And 6 months later, he developed testicular cancer. And as an MD, he goes, there has to be a correlation between the death of my son and my cancer. I wonder if other men have had the same experience. And he started interviewing patients, and CT scans were new back then. So he goes, I'm going to take a look at their brain because I know the brain is the control center. If I have testicular cancer, then my brain, the part of my brain that controls that organ, is going to be affected, most likely. And that's his theory. So he goes, okay, I want to scan my own brain. And he saw that the part of the brain that controls the reproductive organs had these circular rings kind of imprinted in that area. And so he started scanning the brains of other men that had testicular cancer, and they all, without fail, had the same exact imprint in the same exact part of the brain. And he goes, I wonder if they had some profound loss connected. It could be to reproduction. It could be a daughter-son figure, or just a profound loss of someone very close to them. And every single one did in the interviews. So he started saying, okay, maybe this is only for cancer, because he started figuring out the root of this is psychosomatic. We all had a conflict shock. Now I'll define this for the first time. Conflict shock, also known as a DHS, Hamer syndrome, is an experience there's three characteristics of a DHS. Number one is you have to have an experience that catches you off guard. Number two, it brings you to a point of shock and overwhelm. And number three, there's a sense of isolation. When those three all hit at once, the body will adapt and go, this organism is overwhelmed, turn on program to help this person survive. And so when he was looking at his own brain, he goes, when my son died, I had a shock. That was a shock. It affected this part of my brain. And what happened from psyche, brain to organ is his testicles went into cell proliferation. And that means cell multiplication. And the reason that happened was because he had this shock of my son, my lineage, I can't procreate. I've lost my son. And so the body goes, how do we help him adapt? Well, reinforce the testicle so he can create more sperm, so he can have a better chance of impregnating a woman. And this is called the conflict active phase. And so before I get into the law of two phases, I'll just, again, say the first law very clearly. The root of all disease is psyche first, brain second, organ third. And how Dr. Hamer discovered this is after he thought maybe this is just cancer, he looked into other diseases, and he, over 20 years, did about 40,000 interviews and mapped every disease and did a brain scan. And you could see the brain scans there on learninggnm.com, a brain scan on every disease, and found, oh yeah, when people have diabetes, this part of the brain's affected. When they have lung cancer, this part of the brain's affected. And based on the interview, found the themes, kind of like the archetypal themes of the biological conflict, and was able to pinpoint that DHS moment and how that's kind of altered their life, their way of being, the choices they make in the world. That is a result of the DHS. So he's been able to categorize this into a type of map. I like to think of it kind of like astrology, human design, all of these maps. It's just another mirror to look into and go, oh, if my body has these symptoms, this is going to point me to what's going on in my psyche. And when I resolve what happens in the psyche, there's a chain reaction, right? That part of the brain instantly goes into scarification, into repair. The program is turned off and you'll go into healing. And this has been, number one, validated in my own experience several times. And I'll be telling some stories on here too. But a friend of mine, for example, lung cancer is suppressed grief. And you could look at it, GNM uses different language, but I think that's actually a more precise way to put it. When that emotion, that repressed emotion, is released, and there's a shift in the way of perceiving the loss, 2 weeks or less, the lung cancer goes away every time. Every time. And there's a friend of mine who also works in root cause healing through psychosomatics. And he's had several clients come with the same exact, will come with lung cancer, get to the same origin point, which is this repression due to fear, due to whatever's going on in the psyche. And once that was resolved, 2 weeks, cancer is completely gone. So law one way to say it is all is mind. And that's, I'm going to kind of overlay these principles or these laws with other laws to just show you kind of the as above, so below-ness of GNM, which I think gives it such a cool spiritual nature. So all is mind. The origin of all disease originates in mind, then affects the brain, then affects the psyche. And there's always a DHS before symptoms. That's really what you want to take away. So instead of going to, oh, I have symptoms, and then you look, was it the mold? Was it what I ate? Was it something in the water? Was it something in the air? Was it the perfume that I smelled that was gross? Was it, that's what we tend to do. And that's so built into. So after this webinar, also just take notice of where your mind goes when a symptom arises, where you look for cause. So that's number one. Let's go to law 2. So DHS first, symptom second. This is all is mind, cause and effect both in mind. Law 2 is the law of 2 phases. I just call it the law of polarity. DHS. What's a DHS? Okay, so again, DHS, a moment, there's 3 aspects to a DHS. It's a moment of being caught off guard, being shocked into overwhelm, and feeling isolated all at the same time. I stray from calling it a traumatic experience because there's so many different definitions of what trauma is. And this is very specific. It's like when these 3 things add up, boom, the brain will be impacted. The psyche, the energy that animates the brain will impact the brain and turn on an adaptation. Does that make sense, Christina? Okay. So I'll give an example of a DHS. It could be like one that I had that was really strong was in my last relationship, finding out that my partner cheated on me. And it was devastating. It was like you're frozen, you're overwhelmed, you go into you're shocked, you're caught off guard, and there's a total feeling of isolation. And it's like, boom, cell danger response. Geerd Hamer syndrome is what DHS means. It could be when you were a child and there was an argument and you were just shocked. It doesn't always have to look like a freeze, but there's going to be that moment of intense overwhelm, being caught off guard and feeling isolated. So every symptom is kind of like a window into discovering a DHS. You don't have to find the moment. It's just helpful because the moment could have been when you were in the womb. We don't know until we know. And if you can't find it, you don't need to find it in order to heal. It's just helpful. That's one place that we go. Because again, the thing about the DHS is you will recreate it over and over. So any moment that is that moment in different clothing, we can work with because they all contain the same information. So law 2 is law of 2 phases. Also, I just call it the law of polarity. And what Dr. Hamer discovered was in Western medicine, they say there's 2 categories of disease, cold and hot. And that's literally referring to temperature. It's like the cold diseases, and I don't remember what they are offhand, but there's a list, and they're even approximately. There's like, let's say there's 50 cold diseases and 50 hot diseases. An example of like a hot disease would be, or illness or sickness would be like pneumonia, where you maybe start having a fever and there's swelling and there's inflammation. The cold A cold illness or disease is the opposite of that. You're going cold, you're in fight or flight, your hands and feet are cold. This could be like being anemic, for example. So what Dr. Hamer discovered is there's not actually these two categories of disease. They're two sides of the same coin. They're different phases of the adaptation that your body has turned on. The cold phase is when the conflict is active. So let's say, I'll give an example. Someone comes in my house. I really don't want them to be there. I'm getting really angry. And again, like we talked about on this call earlier, there's two approaches to conflict resolution. There's outside in, which is get out of my house, or there's inside out, which is what am I believing about this person that is making me feel angry? And can I resolve that in my psyche? And can I not repress my anger, but allow it to transform? The type of resolution I teach is both. You start with inside, and then that informs the choices you make outside, right? So if I don't do anything, if I'm suppressing my anger and putting on a smile, I'm in a conflict active phase where I'm angry, and a program can turn on that says your territory, it's called the territorial anger conflict. And so in the territorial anger conflict active phase, there are no symptoms. Because in an active conflict phase, you're in fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. That's the cold phase. Your hands and feet will be cold. Dr. Hamer used to, when people would enter his office, nice to meet you, shake their hand to feel what phase they're in. Cold hands, active, active conflict. Warm hand, healing phase. So let's say I come to some sort of resolution internally, and then maybe what it looks like externally is creating a boundary. And now my biology isn't interpreting this as a threat to my territory. And let's say then that night, I might have night sweats and a slight fever. And now that's the warm phase. That's the healing phase. So symptoms only appear in a healing phase. And I'll use this as an example, territorial anger. Let me do a different one. Let's see, territory loss. I think it's territory loss. I'll have to double check this, but I'll use this as an example. I'll use abandonment because I know this one really well. An abandonment conflict. In conflict active, you're just, again, cold feet, usually you're high energy, but you're also either having difficulty falling asleep or you're waking up at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. a lot. And that means, your body's giving you these surges of adrenaline to say, you're not safe, you need to go resolve the conflict. And this is why typically when you wake up at 3 or 4, where does your mind go to? The active conflict in your life. Your body's saying, hey, resolve this so we can relax and rest. And so for an abandonment conflict, for example, or the technical GNM term is a fish out of water conflict. Let's say you were kicked out of your house and you felt like you didn't have a home. The biological program to help you adapt says, okay, we are, and this is based in our ancestry, based in our evolution, and this is actually another law, is that our biology has adapted over all of these years based on this evolutionary model. And our biology is millions of years old. So we still have some of that hardware and software. And so, for example, when we first went from a water aquatic animal onto land, that was our first time kind of like being a fish out of water, going as a species, going from one home to a new home. And the biological adaptation is hold on to this water so you don't dry out. Hold on to this water because we need to ensure your survival. And if you're, plunged out of your home, you need to, basic needs aren't guaranteed if you don't feel safe. If you feel like you have nowhere to go. They also call it a refugee conflict. So what it will signal is say kidneys turn on retention of water, retain more water. And this is why often after breakups, not always, but it depends on how you're perceiving it, people can put on a lot of weight. And it's really hard to get the weight off because it's not fat, it's water. So there's a program that tells the kidney collecting tubules to go retain water, protect, make sure he stays hydrated. And so then let's say you resolve the conflict. Inside out approach would be mental and emotional processing. Outside in approach would be you and that person or that territory reunite and you don't feel abandoned. Then that night you would have night sweats because you'd be dumping all of the water you no longer need. And there's other details about certain bacteria, TB bacteria, that help in this process that are connected to night sweats. And we can talk about that later if it's relevant. So just using that as an example, you have phase 1, conflict active, no symptoms. Then you have resolution. And then phase 2, you have your symptoms. So one takeaway from the second law is every symptom is an indicator that you've resolved a conflict. That's good news. It means you're entering a healing phase. You know, there's very specific reasons we have fevers. Why do some people's fevers go to 103 and some to 105 and some to 106? Because there's a certain amount of heat that's needed for specific organs to manage what's happening on the fungal level, on the bacterial level, to purge certain the debris that is the side effect of the bacteria breaking down tissue or rebuilding tissue. So every level of even having a fever, you could tell if you have 106. I'd have to look up this specifically, but if it's 106, let's say you know your healing phase is located in the kidneys. If it's 104, it's for the liver or the heart. So it's all very specific, meaningful, and purposeful. So symptoms show up, you're in a healing phase. You've resolved some sort of conflict. To the degree in which you experience the intensity in the conflict active phase will determine the degree in which you experience the intensity in the healing phase. So if it was a really intense shock and it lasted for 6 months, you might be in a healing phase for 8 weeks. That's how long you can have. And it's rare that it goes over 8 weeks, but you can have typically up to 8 weeks of really intense symptoms if you had a really intense, long healing phase. And this is where other alternative medicines actually come into play, and even Western medicine come into play in acute scenarios. Different herbs, knowing what's happening in the body so you know what to supplement. A lot of people, let's say when they're dealing with cell loss, you also lose a fair amount of protein. And a lot of people go, oh, I'm sick, I should just fast. And yeah, fasting is good at times. And based on the specifics of what's happening in your body, you might need more protein than you would previously. And protein is used in almost every metabolic process. So supplementing things like amino acids or just getting the right amount of protein in, it's all very specific based on what's happening in your body. Last thing I'll say before we go into the next law is, let me just give this example again. Let's say I experienced, and this is actually what my dad has experienced as well with his cancer. When you, let's say you feel too slow I'll use GNM terminology, to catch a morsel. A morsel can be anything. In our evolutionary history, it was a food. It was food. It was hunting. It's like, I'm too slow to catch this animal, and if I don't, I'm going to die. So what's the adaptation my body will give me? I'll produce more thyroid hormone to have more energy and endurance so I can catch the animal and eat and survive. Now, because the body doesn't know the difference between a non-physical and physical threat or morsel, you can turn these programs on just by through your mind, through your imagination, through your mental and emotional experience. So let's say you were after a job promotion and your psyche goes, my survival is depending on this. You might go into, and it's stressing you out, right? You might have a kind of a shocking moment, a DHS, and then the adaptation can send you into hyperthyroidism. which says you need more thyroid hormone. You need to get this. You need to get this. And your body's just responding to your psyche. And then let's say you get the promotion. Now, during that time of hyperthyroidism, there's cell proliferation in the gland. So more cells to the gland, so more thyroid cells, so you can produce more thyroid hormone. Now, once you resolve that conflict, you enter inflammation stage. Now, thyroid hormone might start swelling. This is actually exactly what happened to my dad before I knew about German medicine. And the swelling is your body bringing water and blood, which is what inflammation is, to that site to transport bacteria and fungi, which are the decomposers. So in nature, when a tree falls in the forest, bacteria and fungi decompose it so it can be reused and recycled because it's no longer needed. It's not giving off oxygen. It's not serving its primary function. So now it's being recycled. So all of the extra cells, all of the extra cells that are no longer needed in the thyroid, your body goes, okay, we don't need those cells. We're never going to have anything we don't need. So send bacteria and fungi to that area and eat up those extra cells and get them out of the body. And that can happen through sweating. It could look like an infection. And this is the hot phase of the healing cycle. Meanwhile, you have Western medicine going, oh, just throw antibiotics at it. And it's killing the bacteria that the body is programming, right? The bacteria is older than us. We've evolved alongside bacteria and fungus for millions of years. We have a synergy. The way that bacteria and fungi work in the body is synergistic. They're not diametrically opposed. They're not adversaries, right? But Western medicine thinks it is, right? Back to the drama triangle, perpetrator. It's like if you had overflowing dumpsters and rats showed up. Western medicine would go, oh, you have a rat problem. Kill the rats. No, you don't. You have these dumpsters that are full of something that's no longer needed, and they're eating them up. Now, luckily, our body has a secondary adaptation. If you don't have the microbes available, then those, essentially the cancer, you can call it cancer, will just encapsulate itself. And that's what a benign tumor is. It's a version of healing. It's a version of turning that program off and adapting to the scenario in which you don't have the proper bacteria to decompose. So is that making sense? That's law 2. Number 1, law of cause and effect. Number 2, polarity, law of 2 phases. Now we'll go to number 3. I call this just the Trinity. But this is, I don't know their actual name. I have to look it up again. It's the law of germ layers. So essentially, when we are in an embryonic state, I think there are toxins in our environment. Yeah. So I'll just respond to that. So Petra, so yes, there totally can be toxins in our environment that are poisoning. Well, I wouldn't say they're poisoning us until we have poisoning symptoms. So I would say our body knows how to detox. It is incredibly resilient. And unless it's responding to something that pushes us past our toxic load capacity, we're actually not being poisoned by it. And I think this is another way that functional medicine has created a boogeyman to where we feel like I can't be around anything. You know, think about how we were as kids. We're eating like Gushers. Remember Gushers? And like fruit roll-ups and like we're just, you know, the amount of toxins that we put in our body, and at least for me, the amount of energy I had, my sleep was great. I was happy. And I'm talking years. So there's a whole body of work that's like, well, the accumulated this over time. Personally, I don't think it holds bearing, but I used to. And it caused me to always be detoxing. And guess what? That paradigm did. Well, the more that I'm detoxing, the more that I need to detox. And there's always more to detox. There's always more to detox. Versus, no, my body's going to detox. And if I'm aware that it needs to detox, like if I'm getting symptoms, then I can help facilitate that with what I know. So number 3, the Trinity. So when we're in embryology, we're just this bundle of cells. The first thing that kind of appears are 3 different germ layers, skin layers. And these 3 different layers, and what I love about this, if you go from 1 to 2 to 3, we have 1 being all is mind. That's another way of saying all is consciousness. This is the opposite of materialism. Consciousness first model. Everything appears out of, from consciousness, versus the materialist model. We're just these random machines, and then consciousness just appeared from inside of the machine randomly. Right? Those are 2 totally different points of view. So law 1, everything is contained within our cause and effect is within mind, kind of points to that law. Number 2, polarity, right? Yin and yang, law 2. Number 3, Trinity. The energy range that we experience as humans is either positive, negative, or neutral. These are just physics principles that make up our reality. And so when you look into the biology, you're just kind of revealing the laws of reality, which I think is so epic to see it on multiple levels. So the Trinity shows up as there's only 3 germ layers that everything grows from, that you call you or your body. Your brain, the brain grows from these germ layers, and certain parts of the brain grow from different germ layers. For example, the oldest germ layer, what's it called? Is it the old mesoderm? I'd have to double check. The oldest germ layer, what grows from that is the oldest, most primal part of the brain stem. And the brain stem controls our vital functions, things like digestion and reproduction. So your digestive organs and your reproduction, which even as a really simple cell, we have those organs. So they're the oldest and most vital parts to our survival, are controlled by the brainstem. And then you have the different lobes and temporal lobes and whatnot that are made of, think of it like this: each part of the brain that evolved from a certain germ layer is a certain color, and there's 3 colors. And the corresponding organs are of the same color, of the same makeup. And so when we say, oh yeah, I had a death fright conflict, I know that's in like my very primal brainstem part of my brain, and I know that that's going to affect lungs. And if I have a digestive issue, I know it's going to, or if I have a indigestible morsel, something I couldn't digest, it's obviously going to affect my digestion, my intestines or colon or stomach, depending on where it lands. And on the brain scan, you'll see that that has affected my brainstem. So what this is pointing to, let me just double check here. Yep. Okay. Is that the brain scans validate that it's really the germ layers and the organs that arise from the same germ layers that are intrinsically connected when it comes to cause and effect, from the brain hitting the psyche, and then the germ layer associated with that and the organs associated with that, because they all stem back to how we were as a really single-celled organism and through that evolutionary process. I'll add this in here as well. Through that evolutionary process, in the beginning, life was fairly simple, right? As a single-celled organism, we're concerned with eating and reproducing. And to some degree, we're still primarily concerned with that, right? And then as that organism evolved, you start to throw in, and we become, let's say, like mammals or more intelligently thinking, speaking animals, social dynamics, as we start to form tribes, social dynamics start to emerge. And that's a whole new realm of conflicts. Let's say this is from the new mesoderm, which is parts of the brain like the prefrontal cortex, which is about social shame, right? It's about like guilt and jealousy and anger, you're more concerned about your territory now. Okay, this is my territory, this is where I'm safe, that's your territory. So as the complexity of life increases, we are required to have biologically more adaptations to that complexity. And so now we have a host, I think maybe there's around 50 or 60 different types of special biological programs. That's what we call an adaptation. So when you have a DHS, what happens is a special biological program, a way of adapting, turns on. And most people call that a disease, especially when the symptoms happen. But what actually happened is when the symptoms appear, you resolve the previously held dis-ease in the psyche. And they've got it backwards. And so this law also points to the evolutionary relevance of all of these adaptations and why it would make so much sense to, let's say if I had an experience I couldn't digest, my body turns on the same program as it would when I was a caveman, our caveman ancestors would, let's say, on accident, eat a rock that was mixed in with their food. And their body goes, uh-oh, we can't digest this. Turn on adaptation and may create cramps, right? Cramp that area, because cramping is the attempt to move something through your digestive system, and create cell proliferation so we can create more digestive juices to dissolve this rock. If any of us ate something right now the body couldn't digest, this is what would happen. It's just the biological response. And then once it finally passes and you purge, which in that case will probably be diarrhea, that's what's called an epicrisis. This is another technical term. An epicrisis is kind of like the halfway point of your healing. So you might start having symptoms, something like use indigestible morsel, cramping, bloating, maybe even for a short while, constipation, because you're in this active, stressful state. And let's say, I'll keep it physical for now. Once that rock passes, you have diarrhea. It's almost like the reliving of the initial crisis in a very short and acute experience. And it's what your body does to transition you from sympathetic into parasympathetic dominance, which is like back into rest and relax. And the biological purpose of that is going to be to pass the morsel, but also to get rid of all of the cell debris that the inflammation, the bacteria and the fungi went to that site to turn off the program. And now it's like, oh, we don't need these extra digestive juices anymore. We don't need any of this, like get it all out. And now we can repair or rebuild the site, depending on if it was cell proliferation or cell loss. And the same thing happens with an indigestible mental morsel. Our body goes into this same response. Last thing I'll say here is this whole mold phenomenology, right? Mold, everyone has mold. What is that? Well, if you're in a healing phase, that you are going to have a heightened degree of certain bacteria and mold, because the body's saying we either need to repair or break down tissue. And that's the job of bacteria and fungi. And this has been proven even in Western science. So is it the mold and the bacteria, the fungus that we've been evolving with, that's been in nature for millions of years, just attacking and killing everyone? Or does that just so happen to be at the site when you're measuring or trying to discern what's actually at cause here? And we're blaming these synergistic organisms as cause of disease. When in reality, you're in a healing phase, they're there for a very specific reason, and they can actually become programmed by our brain. Our brain can program and communicate with bacteria and fungus to give them tasks and certain jobs. And that includes them reproducing more. This also will explain a bit of why you can go, let's say, to a foreign country and start to get exposed to all this foreign bacteria and fungus, and then go into a healing phase. Because your body's been saying, look, there's some stuff, like let's say you did a round of antibiotics and you killed off this bacteria that is typically very common when you're eating and living naturally. You're going to have a wide range of bacteria. Let's say you, in a less natural way, killed all that off, and then you get exposed to it again. Your body goes, finally, we've been waiting on this bacteria so we can initiate this healing phase. And you go, I caught a bug. Well, kind of, but the bug's not, attacking you. The bug is being programmed by your body to initiate a healing phase that you didn't have the proper, probiotics or bacteria to initiate. And so you want that. We want that. That's something to celebrate. And when you really start to understand this, especially around cancer, there's just so much fear that naturally dissipates. When you realize, I'll give you an example, a metastasizing tumor is the swelling of part of the organ that was previously in either cell proliferation or cell loss. And the bacteria is coming to the site, let's say it was cell loss, to rebuild that organ. And it's just part of the process. Now, there are times where if the conflict is so extreme, and let's say you have all these other conflicts and your constitution, your will is very low, that it can overwhelm you. And that's where you might want to bring in and consult German new medicine practitioners to, okay, maybe there is a time for a type of surgery there's still an openness to that in acute cases, or different ways of helping your body adapt. Because again, the conflicts that we're facing today didn't necessarily exist when we all lived in a village. You're meeting with everyone every night. You're dancing around the fire. There's community. If two people have a disagreement, the village takes it on. It's like the amount of time we spend in conflict and in isolation compared to our village ancestors is not necessarily natural. So we can, this is why chronic disease and all these things are rampant in the West, and in tribes, they're not. In hunter-gatherer tribes, there's almost no chronic disease. And so let's go to the final, let's see. Yep, the final law, and then I'm going to open up for some questions. So the final law is what Dr. Hamer calls quintessence. And I love this because quintessence just means everything is conspiring for you to support the organism in your favor. It's not you need to defend yourself against some boogeyman out there. It's no, actually, every symptom, right? Every fever, every runny nose, every period of not being able to sleep, it's all here to serve me. It's all here. Either it's helping me adapt to a acute stressful situation, a DHS. I'm either adapting or healing. I'm adapting or healing. And that's a completely different way to relate to your body. It gives you a completely different relationship to trusting your body. And when you see that's true in your body and you go, my body is nature. Nature follows these laws. This is a law of nature. If it's true in my body, it's true in your body. What is our body made up of? It's literally made up of nature. Food, the earth becoming this, growing this. One part contains the whole. So this is such a powerful window into perceiving your life naturally, which is this quintessence paradigm. That's all happening for me. And when I could see it in my biology, and some of us logical scientific thinkers need to see that to really believe it. Because like, yeah, okay, that makes sense until, you know, my boyfriend dumps me, or until this happens, or until that happens. And that also introduces a more spiritual context. So before we go into specific questions, maybe about your symptoms, questions about the laws. Well, before we go into questions about your symptoms, any questions about the 5 biological laws? Let me also just give this definition of chronic disease so you understand this. This is really important. When you have a DHS and you're conflict active and you have an unconscious resolution, I'll give you an example. This has probably happened to all of us. You're in your stressful day-to-day life and you have a vacation coming up and you start to feel so excited about the vacation. You go on vacation and then 2 or 3 days in, you are sleeping so deeply. You are resting. Your mind is completely clear of the life you left behind. And in that deep rest, it's called vagatonia, your body goes, we could finally heal. We're out of the danger. And you get sick. You know, how many of us get sick on vacation? But simultaneously are in a period of deep rest and relaxation. When we finally let ourselves rest, your body goes, okay, I'm going to take advantage of this rest and we're going to heal. Yeah, there you go. And then you come back and it's like back into conflict active mode. So that would be an unconscious resolution, healing phase that was activated. But if it was purely outside in, induced by the environment, then as soon as your environment change, you know, your biology changes. Now, if you keep oscillating between those two, that's called a hanging healing. You're never giving your body a chance to fully resolve, because after it's resolved, it's activated. Then it's resolving and reactivating. That is what chronic disease is. Because you go, these symptoms keep coming and going, coming and going, coming and going. Conflict active healing, conflict active healing. So there's just something that hasn't been seen yet that makes it make sense to keep activating this defense. There's a meaningful reason for it in your psyche that says, no, I need this defense. There is a threat here, and it hasn't been dissolved yet. And there's going to be a way of living, and it might be just total shit boundaries. It might be the fear of living in your passion and excitement. It might be the fear of being rejected. It might be an experience of abandonment in the past that keeps recreating itself. It's going to be different for each person, but it's a chronic way of being that never allows you to just deeply rest. And when that changes and you allow yourself to get into that vagatonia, then you will heal. Sick during the holidays. Why do we all get sick during the holidays? Well, leading up to the holidays, we probably get a little conflict active. All my trauma is associated with these family members. So leading up to it, I'm a little more, my hands are cold, my feet are cold, I'm not sleeping that well. Maybe I'm a little anxious. I get there. Maybe I get triggered a few times. And then I leave and come back and get sick. Oh, now that that's over and I can rest, boom, all the symptoms. And this model will also explain every plague that's ever happened, every pandemic, the whole vax-unvax issue in a very specific way, in a very biological way. And that might be a whole other webinar. So, any questions? Yes.
Can you describe what the rings and imprints are on the CT scans? Everything else makes perfect sense. Like I really get it. I'm just trying to understand what those point to.
It's just the it's the effect of your body turning on an adaptation response in the corresponding organ. So since the brain controls the organ, when those rings appear in that area, that's the effect of the program associated with that organ turning on. It's just an adaptation response.
And so the rings might be areas of activity, areas of energy, whatever that's going on within your brain around that particular
that's right. And they're concentric rings, which is interesting. I love, as you could tell, finding different like cross-disciplinary evidence. And there's something to concentric rings, concentric circles, and also things like molecules, atoms. There's like this whole, that's the spiral, you know, it's like, oh, turn this on. And what is the psyche? The activity of the brain. So it's something that I don't know if we can prove what is causing that, because it seems like what's causing that is maybe an energy in the psyche, which I guess we would call maybe electric. And I don't know if we can measure that right now. Like what's the thing that turns it on? All we can say right now is the psyche, an event, a DHS in the psyche that body says we need to adapt. So brain, activity in that part of the brain to turn on the organ. And as soon as it's resolved, inflammation to the brain. This is brain fog. This could be dizziness. An epicrisis could be fainting even if there's a lot of swelling, if it was a really big impact, because it's your body pressing that edema, that fluid out, so it can then begin to scarify. Did that answer your question?
It did. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions about the laws before we open up to your, I want to give some space for specific symptoms. Okay. Let's do, so does anyone, let me just check my, okay. Symptoms. Would anyone like some support or insight on symptoms that you're dealing with? Maybe if there's something chronic, we might end up talking about a track. I haven't talked about tracks yet, but in short, a track is, I'll just give this as an example, allergies. Let's say at 10 years old, I had a shocking event, right? And in that moment, I was eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And my brain goes, my unconscious or subconscious mind, and this has also been proven in the neuroscience, that it's literally recording everything, all like an amount of information we can't consciously comprehend. So let's say I'm incredibly shocked and I'm eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and it goes and it tags that food item. I'll just use the peanut butter for example. This is dangerous. Last time we had this, we were in danger. Our life was in danger, because that's how we biologically interpret these DHS events. Biologically, it's a fear of death. This, you know, a DHS triggers the survival mechanism in our body to survive. So it goes, let's tag that peanut butter. So now every time you have peanut butter, you have an allergic reaction to the peanut butter. Now, is it the peanut butter, or is it that your body tagged the peanut butter for a specific reason? And this is why people, allergies aren't universal. Some people can, have certain food allergies and other people can't. And they go, oh, it's a genetic thing. Well, don't you know, and epigenetics proves this, that genes can be upregulated or downregulated. Well, what controls the genes being upregulated or downregulated, turned on or turned off? The brain. What controls the brain? The psyche. I've overcome my gluten allergy and peanut butter allergy through GNM. And I could tell so many more stories, but I might say that for another time. So yeah, just you can go ahead and just unmute
Hey,
Hi, Victoria.
what's going on?
I'm excited to hear your symptoms.
You and I have talked about it before, but it's this lingering allergy thing. Like, I
Yep.
don't know what's going on, and it's, I can't move out of the state of California just because I have allergies.
Yeah.
So, and I wasn't
What's
having this
the
before I moved
symptom?
back.
What's the symptom?
Um, it depends on the day, but when it's better, I don't have them, but it's like a general stuffiness. Like I have it, like my nose is
Stuffiness.
dry right now and it's not running, but it's like this part feels kind of stuffy and my head feels kind of stuffy. Like there's
Mhm.
like a layer of cotton in my brain.
Yeah.
And then or typically when I wake up, like today was better. I think it was only around for like 5, 10 minutes and getting out in the sun has been helping. But again, like I'm doing a lot of these kind of like figuring out like, oh, like if I sit in the sun for 2 hours and they dry up, like if I wake up for the first like hour or two, like my nose will be running on a day that's like worse.
Got it.
And when I lie down to sleep, like I can't breathe out of my like
Yeah.
right, like my left nostril. So it's
Yeah.
like weird.
Okay. So this in GNM terms is a stink conflict. So I'll give you an example back to our evolutionary history. You're walking in the forest and there's something that like profusely stinks. And the urge that we get is disgust. And disgust is a biological urge to move away from something because we know, let's say, if we ate it or touch it, it's poisonous. If I ate dog crap, it would be poisonous. So I'm disgust. I might have a little disgust at the smell. And the adaptation is your body going, okay, we want to get, there's smells in our environment that we need to be aware of. So increase, now I have to double check this one. I think it is cell proliferation. Increase cells in the nose membrane to have a more keen sense of sniff, of smelling, of sensitivity, because there's something in my environment that stinks that I need to avoid. So give this person a temporary superpower. That's the adaptation. So they can very clearly navigate what's happening. And then when you're out of the conflict, okay, we don't need those cells anymore. Send mucus because the mucus contains the bacteria to eat up the cells. So where that's on the physical level, you want to look at what in my life is perpetually stinking, what stinks, and in some way might even evoke a sense of disgust, and that's going to point to the conflict that keeps getting triggered. Now, food could be associated with that. You could eat the food and then it could come on, but the original shock is going to be in a moment of that, like a stink conflict, disgust towards something that just stunk. And they have to use biological terms, right? And now the art is to translate that in a way that makes sense to the psyche and look for an event and experience where that may make sense to you. So that's where I would look.
I have a follow-up clarification.
Yep.
How do you balance then looking at that and then not getting lost in the sort of physical remedies to try to like make, relieve it in the meantime? Because it's like annoying and
Well,
it
there's
really
nothing
impacts my
wrong
day.
with relieving it. Like I would encourage doing whatever is like using natural remedies for comfort is fine. It's just it can't turn off a biological conflict. It just can't. Like it can't tell the brain, hey, stop turning these cells on. You know. So it's like use that, but if you're going to that as um solution to the biological program being turned off, then there'll be perpetual disappointment and like, oh, it's still not working. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. So do whatever you need to do to feel comfortable and then use that, energy or space of comfort to dive into the psyche.
With inquiry.
Yeah. And also going and do this too. I've had dreams, I've had things come to me in meditation. Actually ask your body when you're in the conflict, your subconscious, what is connected to this? Show me. What experience, what moment turned this on? People have asked that and they get a dream that night of an ex-partner that left them, that they really want in their life, but they feel like they can't have them in their life. And they keep breaking out with rashes under the arms. And what is a rash under the arms? Wanting someone close, but not being able to have them. It's called a separation conflict. This is all skin issues, are separation conflicts. And it's so funny because I had that exact moment with my ex-partner when she left, and I didn't want her to leave. And as soon as she came back, I broke out in a rash right under my arms, and I was experiencing the same thing, and actually had a DHS. And it was textbook GNM. So yeah, ask your body, ask your subconscious to show you. And yeah, when the symptoms are up, it's like, what did I do? Eat? Where was I? What was my train of thought right previous to when these symptoms started? And you can, in the meantime, avoid certain foods and places. That is helpful. It will get you out, most likely, of, the repetitive cycle. But again, it's not a solution.
Cool. Thank you.
Welcome. Who's next?
I would like to ask a question. But my phone, I don't know, it's like really close to dying, so hopefully it'll last. So my issue is like I have a chronic spleen like stagnancy, and it's like everything I eat gets processed through this dysfunctional spleen pancreas area. But then when I had a traumatic brain injury, my brain scan said I had excess white matter, which meant, scar tissues. Like, so I actually did have a physical trauma. But now my symptoms are like between the spleen and the right brain that just like flare up sometimes.
Okay. Do you have heavy periods or a lot of discomfort during your menstrual phase?
I have a shock definitely in my pelvis, and the last one was really excessive, but
yeah. Okay. What about is your spleen swollen at all?
Probably. To me, it always feels like there's a parasite that's embedded in it. And I've had this going on for like 20 years.
Okay.
And it happened after I was in Guatemala and I got really bad dysentery, amoebic dysentery.
Okay.
And I had this theory that something lodged, some sort of parasite lodged into my spleen because that's where it's weak, and has just held on because I've done all sorts of cleanses, and it's like when I do longer cleanses, longer fasts, it helps.
Yeah. Okay, so a couple things on this. This is from the new mesoderm. This is a newer part of the brain that governs things like the lymphatic system. I believe, is this also bones and joints? To double check. The primary conflict is self-devaluation.
Yeah.
So the self-devaluation conflict is, and I know it's been 20 years, but if you go back or even sit in meditation, it's like what happened previous to the spleen becoming an issue that you interpreted as I'm not valuable. And the degree of self-devaluation will affect different parts of the body. The deepest form of self-devaluation is when it affects the bones. It's like we speak biologically. I'm just going to mute you just for the background noise, and you can unmute. The deepest form of self-devaluation is osteoporosis. And it's like when this thing happened and I felt it in my bones. We speak biologically because of our intuitive nature. And so I feel it in my bones. I'm just not worth it. I shouldn't be here. Well, yeah, you will literally disintegrate. So a more shallow version of that, you're muted right now, Petra. I'm just muting you because the wind. A less intense version of that is going to hit the lymphatic system, which the spleen is intrinsically a part of. And so that's where I would go to it is, okay, what happened? What experience did I interpret and experience a fairly intense self-devaluation. And again, I'm not talking about resolution. I'm like pointing you to what it could be. Resolution isn't going to happen in 3 minutes on this call. It's deeper work. Anyone else want to share? I think there was someone here. Jess, you put in, okay. Would you explain a baby being born with an allergy, the mother going through DHS? Yeah, that's exactly it. You nailed it. And so here's something interesting. So when you have a series of active biological conflicts, 2 or 3 of these concentric circles, these programs on in your brain, depending on where they're located, your body will create something that's called a constellation. So I'll give you an example of a constellation, and there's really 2 types. A constellation can be a biological adaptation, or it can create a behavior change. So for example, like narcissism, ADHD, autism, even Down syndrome, all of these are constellations, or things like being a megalomaniac, a manic depressive. There's one called the Casanova, which is like a man who's hypersexualizing women and is obsessed. And there's a version of that for the woman called the Nympho constellation. And both of these are a DHS around sexual rejection and a DHS around territory loss. So it's this way of trying to resolve those conflicts by getting your territory and overcoming sexual rejection by getting sex. And it's so innocent because you're just being run by your biology because it's unconscious. There's something wrong with you. Because if you actually did do that and that registered for you, you might actually resolve that conflict, of course, until they leave you. So again, outside in. But the reason I said that was because mothers and fathers, and we're all constellated. You know, I mean, it's not always true. We can be unconstellated, but most of us grow up, and based on our experiences, there's some constellation that helped us adapt, some series of conflicts, usually more than one. So those constellations, it's very typical for them to repeat in the children because it's your way of thinking, believing, acting, and living. And their unconscious is just immersing in it. They don't always have to take it on, but often that happens. So if the mother, and again, it's also a sovereign being. So let's say, yeah, the mother has a DHS and the mother was eating a certain food, and that baby is shocked in that moment, and that food is in the system. And whatever is going to that child via the umbilical, they're tagging it from that point on, going, oh, I can't eat this. And, you know, all of it can be resolved. I'll give an example of a resolution that happened with a baby that was non-verbal, because they're non-verbal. A child was left in a crib and wanted to get out, but couldn't get out. I was like crawling, trying to get out. And eventually, and it wasn't for a long period of time, but the parents came in and they found their child paralyzed. And luckily they knew German new medicine. They take the baby to a German new medicine practitioner, says what happened. You know, it's like, oh, on the baby cam, it's trying to get out and then just paralyzed. And the German new medicine doctor was able to go, oh, this was, and I'm forgetting the name of the conflict, but it was I think it's a motor conflict. So it's the body going, I'm in danger. And this could be, you know, a child being separated from the mother can interpret that as danger because they can't survive. They are dependent. So there could be this danger response. My life's in danger. I don't have my needs met and I can't get away. So the biology goes, danger is imminent and I can't get away. So how do I adapt? Play dead. Paralyzed. Now I won't be eaten. So they go back to that crib. Baby legs don't work. It was just the legs that were paralyzed. And very slowly just start where the place where the paralysis took place. And they just start moving the legs kind of mechanically, encouraging him to crawl in the same place that he previously thought he couldn't. But now he's safe. And about an hour of doing this and encouraging and loving on him and moving the legs, the paralysis completely lifted. So does that answer your question, Jess? Yeah, awesome. All right, anything else before we sign off? I can give you guys some general takeaways. Yep, go ahead.
I just had a question for you. I guess then kind of connecting these different threads, what you're really speaking to then is it's a combination of belief systems and pattern recognition that's playing into all these things. Incorrect
Absolutely.
pattern recognition, like the peanut butter example, that kind of thing, where there was a conflict, but it was associated with something else. The brain picked up on one of the many influences around
Right.
and combined with a belief system that says X produces this kind of thing. Is
Right. That's right. Yep.
so kind of the work that people, so when you can't remember a conflict,
Yeah.
you're young, could have been something in the womb, whatever. The kind of route to doing this is, like you said, hyper awareness, vigilance of what the triggers are now and trying to
Yep.
piece those things.
Yes.
Another way might be to unwind or try to unwind the belief systems that are holding this there, because it's both those that have to happen together, really, that for this to kick in, right?
That's right.
One of them will detach that, or at least start to resolve that piece.
Yep, that's exactly right. And it's like we have to recreate conflicts because the nature of holding on to a conflict is to keep them unconscious. And Quintessence says everything's moving towards more order. And so when we experience an event that evokes that unconsciousness, it's a window into the cause of our dis-ease. And the same information that caused that is available when it gets recaused or reactivated. So really, we can look at our last month, 2 months, and get really honest and zoom in on moments where that cell danger response, we can call it being triggered, but an intense, I'm not safe. And my practice of resolution is called integrated somatic inquiry. And it just means we're integrating mind and body through inquiry. What's being believed here? What's the source of the danger and fear? And I might never be able to access the original imprint, but that original imprint is here now in these scenarios that we can work with. And then you'll find too that typically the opposite behavior is the version of you that's incompatible with disease. So for example, it might be, I had an experience where, I couldn't say no. I was people pleasing because of my deep fear of abandonment. And now I resolve the abandonment. And now next time the scenario comes up, I say no. And instead of leading that interaction disempowered, afraid for my life biologically, I feel completely empowered and safe. And so really it's like we can't heal dis-ease by remaining the same version of us. And that's why this is so empowering, because if Western medicine were to adopt this, you would see just a type of evolution that has to result in more harmony, quintessence, between humans. Because the importance of our psyche and our mental emotional state becomes primary. It's not, let me affect the physical to change the mental and emotional. It's complete opposite.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. I think there was another. Okay, awesome. Thank you all so much for attending. I'm going to host, I think, probably a series of these. I'm also going to put a series on inquiry, ISI, just the basics of integrated self-inquiry, how you can do it on yourself. It's always helpful to have someone be a mirror to your unconscious. It can be difficult to see our own unconscious sometimes, because again, the brain in its protection will do everything to justify, rationalize, deny, avoid. I mean, there's technically about 13 different ways we try to keep ourselves safe from ourselves. That, like psycho therapy has outlined. And so inquiry is a way to pierce our defenses and get to the core identity statements that we've taken on that are informing what we're believing, feeling, and thinking and doing. And I've had some clients, I had a client, actually I just got a message this morning. She goes, it's been a month since we just did one session. She said, and hers was around abandonment. We had the session. We totally got there. I mean, when someone gets there because they have this cascade effect where it's just like, oh, and the conflict is done. There's nothing in their body fighting against the experience anymore. And I go, and she's also versed in GNM. She goes, I think I'm going to have night sweats tonight. And I'm like, I do too. Next 3 nights, night sweats. It's like perfect. Like kidney collecting tubules, dumping the water. Great. And she messaged me today and goes, I just want to thank you again for that call, because I finally have a relationship with my mother, because it was abandonment from mother. So her way through that chronic dis-ease was through rebuilding her relationship with her mother. And what was previous to that was dropping this story of abandonment and the anger and then the shame that was associated with how she adapted to the abandonment. Well, I'm going to pull away from you. Well, I'm going to make you wrong. It was like bringing light to all of it, resolving it. And so again, the version of her that's incompatible with that dis-ease was the version of her open to loving her mom. And so that's the core of my work. We find what that is. Integrated somatic inquiry also means integrating it into your life. It means having conversations, even if they're challenging, rearranging agreements that you made from a contracted state. There's something that you find in the session that is self-evident that goes, oh, now this is how I live it. And it's in the living of it, your body really gets the message. Oh, this is safe now. I'm doing the thing that previously wasn't. So I don't need this adaptation. So if you're interested in that, you can email me. I'll just put my email here. Also, just go to my website. I do one-off sessions and packages, and do have some space open for the new year. Just put this here too. And yeah, just look out for more content on my Instagram. And if you guys still have any questions or requests, let me know. And thank you for being so engaged and present with me during this. Yeah, I feel you, Jess. Okay. All right, y'all. Again, thank you for being here, and I will see you next time.